The elegant whispers of the exclusive Hudson Bay Club filled the air like expensive perfume, mingling with the scent of aged scotch and polished mahogany. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over generations of wealth and influence gathering for the annual membership gala. Yet as I surveyed the opulent ballroom, the hand-carved ice sculptures, the string quartet playing softly in the corner, the members in their tailored suits and designer gowns, I felt nothing but a cold emptiness spreading through my chest. My brother Doug's face had drained of all color when he spotted me across the room, his new wife Elsa whispering urgently in his ear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marla, Doug said stiffly when I approached, his voice carrying none of the warmth it once held. This is a private event, members and their invited guests only. I was invited, I replied, pulling the embossed invitation from my clutch. By Lucas Whitmore. Elsa's perfectly lined lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. Lucas invited. You as a courtesy, I'm sure. But really, Marla, you don't belong here. These people aren't, well, they aren't your people, are they? Doug shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room rather than meeting mine. Several people nearby had stopped their conversations, attention drawn to our uncomfortable exchange. I could feel their curious stares, the silent judgments already forming. I think what Elsa means, Doug added, lowering his voice, is that you might feel more comfortable somewhere else. This club has certain standards. The implication hung in the air between us, sharp and unmistakable. After everything, after all the years, all the sacrifices, all I had done for him, this was how he saw me. As someone who didn't meet the standards, someone who didn't belong. I felt my throat tighten, but no tears came. Instead, a strange calm settled over me as I looked at my brother's face, a face I once knew better than my own, but now seemed to belong to a stranger. You're right, I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. I don't belong here, not anymore. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor in perfect rhythm, back straight, head high. What none of them knew, not Doug, not Elsa, not a single soul in that room filled with old money and older prejudices, was that I hadn't come to the Hudson Bay Club that night to fit in or to beg for acceptance. I came because 3 weeks ago, I had purchased it. The story of how I ended up walking out of my brother's life that night didn't begin with an invitation, or even with Elsa. It began much earlier, in the modest 3-bedroom house where Doug and I grew up, children of a hardworking, single father who taught high school mathematics and coached Little League on weekends. We weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy either. We were solidly middle class, with college funds built from overtime hours and family vacations planned around budget motel coupons. What we lacked in luxury, we made up for in closeness. Doug was 4 years older, my protector, my confidant, my hero. When neighborhood kids mocked my secondhand clothes, Doug stood up for me. When I struggled with science projects, he stayed up late helping me. When our father died during my senior year of high school, Doug postponed his own plans to make sure I got through graduation. It's you and me now, Marla, he'd said at the funeral, his arm around my shoulders. We're always going to look out for each other. For years, that promise held. Even as Doug climbed the corporate ladder at Atlantic Capital Partners, becoming the golden boy of New York's financial elite, he never seemed to forget where he came from. Sunday dinners were sacred, holiday traditions maintained. He encouraged me as I built my own path, different from his but no less ambitious. My talent was always in finding potential where others saw nothing. I started small, buying a rundown, neighborhood coffee shop with my savings and a small business loan, renovating it myself on weekends, transforming it into a community hub that eventually sold for triple my investment. Then came a struggling boutique hotel, then a historic apartment building facing demolition. I didn't have Doug's Ivy League credentials or his corner office, but I had instinct, grit, and a genuine love for breathing new life into forgotten spaces. When Doug met Elsa Margaret Harrington at a charity gala 3 years ago, something shifted. Elsa came from the kind of family whose name appeared on buildings and hospital wings. She moved through the world with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no, whose path had been cleared long before she took her first steps. First time we met, at an overpriced restaurant I couldn't afford but Doug insisted on. Her eyes assessed me like I was property with questionable value. Real estate development, she'd said when Doug proudly explained my latest project. How enterprising. Though I imagine it must be difficult without proper connections. Her smile never reached her eyes. My father always says, it's not what you know, but who you know that matters in business. Doug laughed a little too loudly. Marla's always been the scrappy one, doing things her own way. I noticed he didn't defend me. Didn't mention that my scrappy approach had resulted in 3 successful business sales and a growing reputation in Brooklyn's redevelopment circles. I let it go. New relationships required adjustment, I told myself. Doug would find his balance. He didn't. As months passed, our Sunday dinners became monthly brunches. His calls grew shorter, filled with stories about the exclusive world he was entering through Elsa, the clubs, the Hamptons weekends, the private jet excursions. When they got engaged, I threw myself into planning an engagement party that would impress Elsa, spending money I couldn't afford on a venue I knew she would approve of. This is nice, she'd said, glancing around with barely concealed disappointment. Very creative, considering your budget constraints. That night, I overheard her telling friends, Doug's done remarkably well for someone from his background. Of course, there are still some rough edges to smooth out. Family ties can be so complicated. I was the complicated family tie. The rough edge that needed smoothing. The reminder of a background Doug was increasingly eager to forget. Still, I persisted. I attended their events when invited, bought clothes I couldn't afford to avoid embarrassing them, smiled through Elsa's backhanded compliments and Doug's growing detachment. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that the brother who had once been my whole world would remember who he was, who we were together. Until the night of the Hudson Bay Club Gala, the night when the distance between us finally became too vast to ignore, too painful to pretend away. The night I realized that sometimes the only way forward is to walk away. 3 months before the Hudson Bay Club Gala, I stood in the small office of my latest acquisition, a dilapidated Art Deco building in Brooklyn that most developers had written off as a lost cause. The windows were grimy, the floorboards creaked ominously, and pigeons had claimed the upper floors as their personal domain. But beneath the decades of neglect, I could see the bones of something magnificent waiting to be uncovered. You're absolutely insane, Marla, said Fran, my business partner and closest friend since college. She poked dubiously at a peeling section of wallpaper, grimacing when it revealed a patch of mold underneath. This place will bankrupt you. It's got potential, I insisted, running my hand along the ornate crown molding that somehow survived years of water damage. And the price was right, because it's a money pit. Fran threw her hands up. We just finished the Williamsburg project. We should be taking a breath, not diving into whatever this disaster is. She wasn't wrong to be concerned. The Williamsburg conversion, turning an abandoned factory into luxury lofts, had stretched our resources thin. This new project was a risk, even by my standards. But something about the building called to me. Maybe it was the grand staircase with its wrought iron railings, or the lobby ceiling with its faded celestial mural. Or maybe it was simply that everyone else had given up on it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I had always been drawn to the forgotten, the overlooked, the things, and people, others dismissed. Trust me, I told Fran. 6 months from now, this place will be the crown jewel of our portfolio. My phone buzzed with a text from Doug. Need your RSVP for the charity dinner next week. Elsa's father will be there. Important connections for you. I smiled at the screen. Despite the growing distance between us, Doug still occasionally tried to include me in his world, to help me network with people he thought could advance my career. He never quite understood that I had built my business through sweat equity and careful research, not cocktail party connections. That the golden boy? Fran asked, peering over my shoulder. She had met Doug several times and found him offensively charming. Her words for someone whose charisma felt practiced rather than genuine. He wants me at some charity thing, probably another $5,000 a plate dinner where they serve microscopic portions. Are you going? I hesitated. The last event had been excruciating. 4 hours of veiled condescension from Elsa's friends, Doug too busy schmoozing to notice, and me in a dress that cost a month's rent but still somehow marked me as an outsider. I should, I finally replied. It's important to him. Fran gave me a look I knew too well, part concern, part exasperation. When did important to him start trumping healthy for you? I didn't have a good answer. The truth was, I kept showing up because I was afraid if I stopped, the remaining threads connecting me to my brother would finally snap. I kept believing that the Doug I knew, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who held my hand through our father's funeral, who promised we'd always have each other's backs, was still in there somewhere, beneath the expensive suits and practiced. Smile, I texted back. I'll be there. The week that followed was a blur of contractor meetings, permit applications, and financial juggling to make the numbers work on the Brooklyn project. I barely had time to pick up my dress from the tailor before the night of the charity dinner. The venue was the grand ballroom at the Pierre, all crystal chandeliers and gold accents. Doug waved me over to a table near the front where he sat, with Elsa, her parents, and several couples I didn't recognize. Marla, you remember the Harringtons? Doug said, gesturing to Elsa's parents. Mr. Harrington gave a curt nod without meeting my eyes. Mrs. Harrington's smile was polite but vacant, the kind reserved for waitstaff or distant acquaintances I hope not to engage with. And this is Trey Caldwell, Doug continued, indicating a silver-haired man with a ruddy complexion. Trey's the chairman of the Hudson Bay Club. I've been telling him about your projects. The slight pause before projects was subtle, but unmistakable. It hung in the air like a question mark. Small-scale renovations, isn't it? Trey asked, his tone suggesting he was talking about a hobby rather than my career. Property redevelopment and historic preservation, I corrected. My team just completed a mixed-use conversion in Williamsburg that's been featured in Architectural Digest. How enterprising, Mrs. Harrington murmured, in exactly the same tone Elsa often used. Elsa put her hand on Doug's arm. Darling, you mention to Marla about your membership nomination? Doug's expression brightened. Not yet. Good news, Marla. The committee is reviewing my application for the Hudson Bay Club. Trey's sponsoring me. The oldest private club in Manhattan, Elsa added, though I hadn't asked. Membership is extremely selective. Congratulations, I said, genuinely happy for him despite the undercurrent of exclusivity in their tone. That's exciting. It's more than exciting, Elsa continued. It's transformative. The connections, the opportunities. Once you're in the Hudson Bay Club, doors open everywhere. The conversation shifted to golf handicaps and vacation homes, effectively walling me out. I picked at my tiny portion of sea bass and tried to look engaged. Across the table, I caught Alex, one of the other guests, watching me with something that might have been sympathy. Midway through dessert, Trey leaned over to Doug. The membership committee meets Monday. I'm optimistic, but it's not a done deal. There's one more hurdle. Doug nodded seriously. Whatever it takes. The annual gala is in 3 months. Every potential member is expected to make an appropriate donation. Shows commitment to the club's philanthropic mission. Of course, Doug agreed immediately. Just let me know the expected amount. Trey named a figure that made me choke on my chocolate mousse. It was more than I had put down as a deposit on my entire Brooklyn building. Consider it done, Doug said, without hesitation. I stared at him, wondering when money had become something he could casually promise in such amounts. Later, as we waited for the valet to bring our cars, I asked him, "Is this club really worth that kind of money?" Doug looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. "It's not about the money, Marla. It's about what it represents. Acceptance. Arrival." "Arrival where?" "You've already arrived by any reasonable standard." His expression hardened slightly. "That's the thing. You've never understood this world. There are circles within circles. The Hudson Bay Club it's belonging to something exclusive, something special. Something other people can't have," I translated. "That's a cynical way to look at it." "Is it?" "Because from where I'm standing, you're paying an obscene amount of money to be part of a club that exists primarily to keep people out." The morning after the charity dinner, I woke before dawn, my conversation with Doug replaying in my mind. I slipped out of bed, made a strong cup of coffee, and did what I always did when I needed clarity. I drove to the Brooklyn building before the rest of the world was awake. The neighborhood was still quiet, streetlights casting long shadows as I unlocked the heavy front doors. Inside, I flipped on the temporary work lights we'd installed, illuminating the cavernous lobby. Without the distraction of contractors or Fran's practical concerns, I could listen to what the building wanted to tell me. That's how I'd always approached my work, not just as construction or renovation, but as conversation. These old structures had stories embedded in their foundations, whispered through creaking floorboards and rattling pipes. My job wasn't to impose my vision, but to uncover theirs. I climbed the grand staircase, running my fingers along the banister, feeling the places where generations of hands had worn the wood smooth. On the second floor, tall windows faced east, and I watched the first light of morning filter through grimy glass, casting dappled patterns on the dusty floor. This was my element. Not gleaming ballrooms or exclusive clubs, but forgotten spaces with hidden potential. I'd discovered this talent by accident, really. After our father died and Doug moved to Manhattan to start his finance career, I'd been left with our childhood. Home, too big for one person, filled with memories that cut like glass. Instead of selling, I renovated. Taught myself basic carpentry from YouTube videos. Spent weekends at salvage yards hunting for period-appropriate fixtures. Transformed the grief-heavy space into something new while honoring what came before. When I finally sold, the profit was unexpected. Enough to put a down payment on a small commercial property in need of similar care. One project led to another. I developed an eye for buildings others overlooked, spaces with good bones beneath years of neglect. I learned to navigate zoning laws and building codes, assembled a team of craftspeople who shared my passion for preservation, and slowly built a reputation for thoughtful, sustainable redevelopment. By the time I met Fran at a historic preservation conference, I had completed 3 successful projects. She brought financial expertise to complement my creative vision, and together we scaled the operation into a legitimate development firm. Not the biggest, not the flashiest, but respected in our niche. Our approach was never about maximum profit. We prioritized maintaining architectural integrity, creating mixed-income housing options, and preserving community spaces. We turned dilapidated theaters into art centers, abandoned factories into affordable lofts for working artists, neglected brownstones into multi-family homes that actual families could afford. It wasn't the kind of work that impressed Elsa's crowd at charity galas, but it had earned us features in architectural magazines and a growing waitlist of investors who appreciated our ethical approach to urban development. Standing in that empty building as dawn broke over Brooklyn, I felt a familiar sense of purpose washing over me. This was what I was meant to do, this careful balance of preservation and progress, this transformation of forgotten spaces into something beautiful and useful again. My phone vibrated in my pocket, an email notification from Alex, the man I met briefly at the charity dinner. The subject line read, "Interesting opportunity, confidential." I opened it, curious. "Marla, we didn't get much chance to talk last night, but I was impressed by what little I heard about your work. I'm part of an investment group looking at some unique properties, and I think your approach might be exactly what we need. There's a particular opportunity I'd like to discuss in confidence. Are you available for coffee this week? Alex Morgan. Horizon Capital Partners. I recognize the firm name, a boutique investment company known for unconventional projects. Unlike the massive private equity firms that flipped properties for quick profit, Horizon had a reputation for long-term vision and community-minded development. I replied immediately, suggesting a coffee shop near my office for later that day. Mid-morning, the building was alive with activity, contractors measuring and marking, an environmental team testing for asbestos, Fran pacing the lobby with her phone pressed to her ear, negotiating with potential retail tenants for the ground. "Floor. The structural engineer's report came back," she announced when she finished her call. "Foundation's solid, but the roof is worse than we thought. Another 100,000 minimum." I winced. Our budget was already stretched thin. "We'll figure it out," I said. "Maybe scale back the finishes on the upper floors or phase the roof repair." Fran gave me a skeptical look. "Or we could accept that developer's offer. They called again this morning, added another $1 million to their bid." I shook, my head firmly. "They'll gut it, throw up cheap partitions, and charge luxury prices for glorified shoeboxes. That's not what this building deserves." "Buildings don't have feelings, Marla." "Maybe not. But communities do. And this neighborhood doesn't need another soulless luxury conversion that prices out everyone who actually lives here." Fran sighed but didn't argue further. She knew this was a fundamental principle for me. We developed properties, yes, but with respect for their history and the neighborhoods they anchored. It wasn't just business. It was a responsibility. That afternoon, I met Alex at the coffee shop, expecting a brief introduction before scheduling a more formal meeting. Instead, our conversation stretched to nearly 3 hours as he outlined a project that made my Brooklyn building seem simple by comparison. "The Hudson Bay Club," he said, leaning forward, voice low despite the cafe's ambient noise. "It's not public knowledge, but it's in serious financial trouble." My surprise must have shown on my face. "That can't be right. They just recruited my brother with some astronomical membership fee." Alex nodded. "That's part of the problem. The club's leadership has been chasing cash by recruiting new members, but the building itself is failing. The last 3 presidents deferred major maintenance to keep annual dues artificially low. Now they're facing millions in required repairs, with insufficient reserves to cover it. And your investment group is looking to what? Bail them out?" "Not exactly." He slid a folder across the table. "We're looking to acquire it entirely, but quietly. If news of their financial situation leaks, the property value plummets. The current board is desperate for a solution that saves face." I opened the folder to find architectural drawings of the Hudson Bay Club building, a magnificent Beaux-Arts structure in Midtown Manhattan. 6 stories of limestone and marble with ornate detailing that would cost a fortune to replicate today. "It's an incredible building," I admitted. "But why come to me? This is well beyond my usual scale." Alex smiled. "That's precisely why. Every major developer in New York would gut the interior and convert it to luxury condos or a boutique hotel. But your reputation suggests you'd find a more creative approach, one that might preserve some of the building's heritage while giving it new purpose." I studied the drawings more carefully, mind already racing with possibilities. The grand ballroom, where wealthy members now gathered for exclusive events could become a public concert venue. The reading rooms could house a community library. The private dining rooms could transform into affordable co-working spaces for nonprofit organizations. The current board would never agree to that kind of democratization, I said finally. They might not have a choice. The alternative is bankruptcy and public humiliation. Alex tapped the folder. Think about it. This could be your most impactful project yet, turning one of the city's most exclusive spaces into something that benefits the many, not just the few. I left our meeting with the folder tucked into my bag, thoughts swirling with equal parts excitement and apprehension. The scope was daunting, the politics complicated, the financial requirements far beyond anything I'd previously managed. And then there was Doug. Pursuing membership in a club I was now considering purchasing and fundamentally transforming. The irony wasn't lost on me. That Sunday, I drove to Doug's Westchester home for our monthly brunch, a tradition that had replaced our weekly dinners after he and Elsa moved from the city to a sprawling colonial with manicured grounds and a 3-car garage. The house was beautiful, certainly, but it always felt more like a showpiece than a home. Too perfect, too curated, too empty of the small messes that indicate actual living. Elsa opened the door in crisp white linen pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Marla," she said with practiced warmth. "How lovely." The dining room table was set with delicate china and fresh flowers. Doug was on the terrace, taking a work call despite it being Sunday morning. He waved at me through the French doors but made no move to end his conversation. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, following Elsa to the kitchen where a catering service was quietly arranging platters of smoked salmon and fresh fruit. "Everything's under control," she replied, the subtle implication being that my help wasn't needed or wanted. "Douglas will be finished momentarily. Mimosa?" I accepted the offered champagne flute, wondering when my brother had become Douglas instead of Doug. It was one of many small transformations I'd observed over the past 2 years. The way he'd replaced his warm laugh with a restrained chuckle, how he now checked his watch during conversations as if perpetually needed elsewhere, his newfound habit of name-dropping acquaintances at every opportunity. When he finally joined us, sliding his phone into the pocket of his tailored slacks, his smile was warm but distracted. "Sorry about that. Tokyo Market's opening." "On Sunday?" I asked. "Markets never sleep, especially now that we're expanding the Asia division." He sat at the head of the table while the caterer began serving. "How's your latest project? The Brooklyn thing?" "It's coming along. We found original mosaic floors. Under the lobby carpeting. Probably early 1920s work that's been covered up for decades." Elsa made a polite noise of interest while examining her fruit plate. "Preservation must be so rewarding. All that history." "It is," I said, refusing to rise to whatever subtle barb lurked beneath her tone. "Actually, I might be looking at a new opportunity, something bigger than my usual scale." Doug perked up at this. "Really? What kind of property?" I hesitated, not ready to mention the Hudson Bay Club, a historic building in Manhattan. Significant restoration needs, but incredible potential. "Manhattan proper? That's a step up from Brooklyn," Doug said, his tone suggesting this was a compliment rather than the condescension it actually was. "Do you have the capital for something like that?" "I'm exploring partnership options," I said carefully. "You should talk to Trey," Elsa interjected. "His firm specializes in historic properties. He could be a valuable advisor or investor." The irony of her suggesting Trey Caldwell, chairman of the very club I was considering purchasing, wasn't lost on me. I smiled non-committally. "Speaking of Trey," Doug continued, "we have fantastic news. The membership committee approved my application to the Hudson Bay Club. We're being formally inducted at the annual gala." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for his excitement despite my mixed feelings about the club itself. Congratulations! It's a tremendous honor, Elsa added, reaching for Doug's hand across the table. Only 3 new members were accepted this year. Trey says it's the most exclusive cohort in decades. Doug turned to me, his expression unusually earnest. I'd really like you to be there, Marla, at the gala. The invitation surprised me. These exclusive events weren't typically where Doug wanted me visible. Are you sure? It sounds very selective. That's why it's important to me, he insisted. This is a significant moment in my life. I want my sister there. Something in his voice, a trace of the old Doug perhaps, made my heart twist. Despite everything, despite the growing distance between us, he was still my brother. And in that moment, he wanted me present for something that mattered to him. Of course I'll be there, I promised. The conversation drifted to other topics: Elsa's charity committee, Doug's upcoming business trip to Singapore, neighborhood gossip about which tech executive had just purchased the property down the road. I contributed where I could, but increasingly felt like a visitor from another planet, observing customs I could mimic, but never truly understand. As brunch concluded, I helped clear the table despite Elsa's insistence that the caterers would handle it. In the kitchen, away from Elsa's monitoring gaze, Doug asked quietly, "Are you really okay? You seem, I don't know, distant today?" The question caught me off guard. It had been months since he'd asked anything about my emotional state. Longer, still, since he'd seemed to notice when something was weighing on me. "I'm fine," I assured him, "just a lot on my mind with work." He nodded, then surprised me by adding, "Dad would be proud of you, you know, what you've built on your own." The unexpected reference to our father, a topic we rarely broached anymore, made my throat tighten. He'd be proud of both of us. I'm not so sure. A shadow crossed Doug's face. Sometimes I wonder what he'd make of all this. He gestured vaguely at the perfect kitchen, the catering staff, the manicured view through the window. For a brief moment, I glimpsed my actual brother beneath the polished exterior, the boy who had played catch with me in our modest backyard, who had helped me with math homework at our scratched kitchen table, who had promised at our father's funeral that we would always look out for each other. "He'd want you to be happy," I said softly. "That's all he ever wanted for us." Doug's phone buzzed again, breaking the moment. He glanced at it and sighed. "I need to take this. I'm sorry." "It's fine," I assured him, though it wasn't. "I should get going anyway." As I drove back to the city, I found myself thinking about the Hudson Bay Club proposal. Alex had emailed additional materials, financial projections, architectural assessments, potential funding structures. The opportunity was compelling, the vision exciting. But now, knowing how much Doug's membership meant to him, I faced a complicated ethical question. If I moved forward with the acquisition, I would inevitably transform the very institution Doug was so proud to join. The exclusivity he valued would be dismantled, replaced by something more accessible, more democratic. Was I willing to undermine something that clearly mattered so much to my brother, even if I believed the transformation served a greater good? By the time I reached my apartment, I had my answer. The Hudson Bay Club represented everything I stood against in my professional life. Spaces designed to exclude, resources hoarded rather than shared, history preserved only for those who could afford the price of admission. If the choice was between my principles and Doug's social aspirations, I knew where I had to stand. I called Alex and told him I was interested in pursuing the acquisition, but with one condition: absolute confidentiality, until the deal was finalized. No one, especially not current club members or those awaiting induction, could know what was coming. "That's already our plan," Alex assured me. "The current board is equally motivated to keep this quiet. If members get wind of the financial Troubles? There could be a mass exodus that tanks the property value overnight. Then I'm in, I said, making a decision that would irrevocably alter my relationship with my brother, though I didn't yet realize just how completely. 2 weeks after agreeing to pursue the Hudson Bay Club acquisition, I found myself sitting in a sleek conference room at Horizon Capital Partners, surrounded by financial projections and property assessments. The investment team Alex had assembled was impressive, a mix of real estate veterans, preservation specialists, and community development experts who shared my vision for transforming exclusive spaces into public resources. The numbers work, declared the chief financial analyst, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret who had spent the morning dissecting the club's financial statements. They're asset-rich but cash-poor. Years of deferred maintenance have created a ticking time bomb. The board knows it, but they've been hiding it from the membership. Alex nodded grimly. Their limestone facade needs complete restoration, approximately $8 million. The roof requires another $3 million. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, all original systems that have exceeded their lifespan twice over. And they've been operating at a deficit for the past 5 years, Margaret added, covering shortfalls by selling off their art collection piece by piece and dipping into their endowment principal. Classic case of maintaining appearances at the expense of sustainability. I studied the architectural drawings spread across the table. What about historical designation? Would that complicate renovation plans? The exterior is protected, confirmed the preservation specialist, but the interior has been significantly altered over the decades, so we have considerable latitude for adaptive reuse inside the building. The meeting continued for hours, diving deep into financial structures, construction timelines, and community engagement strategies. By the end, we had the outline of a plan: form a special purpose entity to acquire the property, secure historic preservation tax credits to offset restoration costs, and phase the transformation to generate revenue even during construction. The board has tentatively agreed to a confidential exploration period, Alex explained as the meeting concluded. We'll have 30 days to complete due diligence before making a formal offer. If all goes well, we could close within 3 months. 3 months. Just in time for the annual gala, where Doug would be inducted as a member. The timing wasn't lost on me, but I pushed the thought aside. This was business, not personal. The fact that my brother's social aspirations might be collateral damage was unfortunate, but unavoidable. As I left the Horizon offices, my phone buzzed with a text from Elsa. Dress fitting for the gala next Tuesday. I've taken the liberty of scheduling you at Bergdorf's. The personal shopper will help you find something suitable. I stared at the message, equal parts annoyed and amused by her presumption. As if I couldn't dress myself appropriately without her intervention. Still, declining would only create tension, and I needed to maintain normal appearances during the due diligence period. Thanks. What time? I replied, swallowing my pride. 3 days later, I was standing on a pedestal in Bergdorf Goodman's exclusive personal shopping suite, surrounded by mirrors while a rail-thin stylist named Claude assessed me with clinical detachment. The gala has a specific aesthetic, he explained, circling me like a fashion predator. Not just formal, historically informed. The Hudson Bay Club values tradition above all. I'm familiar with formal events, I assured him, trying not to sound defensive. His arched eyebrow suggested he thought otherwise. Elsa mentioned you might need comprehensive guidance. Of course she had. Before I could respond, the dressing room door opened, and Elsa herself glided in, immaculate in a camel cashmere coat. I thought I'd surprise you, she announced, air-kissing my cheek. Shopping is so much more fun with company. Her unexpected appearance immediately transformed the atmosphere. Claude snapped to attention, his manner shifting from condescending to obsequious. Mrs. Harrington, what a pleasure. I've pulled several options based on your guidance. Elsa settled onto a velvet sofa, crossing her legs elegantly. Wonderful. Nothing too fashion-forward. The club appreciates classic silhouettes. I bit my tongue as they discussed me as if I weren't present. My coloring, my figure challenges, my apparent inability to navigate high society without supervision. Elsa vetoed several dresses I actually liked, steering me toward conservative options in muted tones. "We want you to blend in," she explained with practiced kindness. "The focus should be on Douglas and the other inductees, not on their guests." "I'm not just a guest," I pointed out. "I'm his sister." "Of course," she conceded, her smile tightening slightly. "All the more reason to ensure you reflect well on him. First impressions at the club are crucial. They establish how people see you forever." As I tried on the seventh dress, an understated navy column that Elsa deemed suitable, she elaborated on the significance of the gala. "It's not just a social event. It's the formal introduction to a network that will define Douglas's future. The people he meets there, the connections he makes, they'll open doors even money can't buy." "It sounds very transactional," I observed. Elsa's laugh was like glass breaking. "That's such a Brooklyn perspective. It's not transactional, it's cultural. These relationships are built on shared values, shared backgrounds, shared understanding of how the world works." "And what happens if you don't share those backgrounds?" I asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Her smile remained fixed, but her gaze cooled. "Then you adapt." Douglas understood that from the beginning. It's why he's thrived. The implication hung in the air between us. "Unlike you." "Some might call that reinvention," I suggested. "I call it evolution," she countered smoothly. Douglas recognized opportunities to elevate himself beyond his origins. Not everyone has that vision. I turned away from the mirror, facing her directly. "Those origins include me, you know, his only family." For a moment, genuine surprise flashed across her face, as if this obvious connection had never occurred to her. Then her expression settled back into polite neutrality. "Family is important," she allowed. "But so is progress. Douglas has worked incredibly hard to position himself where he is now. The Hudson Bay Club membership is the culmination of years of careful networking and reputation building." "And a very large check?" I added. Her eyes narrowed fractionally. "The financial component is merely a demonstration of commitment. What matters is acceptance by the existing membership. Do you have any idea how difficult that is? How selective they are?" I thought of the club's crumbling infrastructure hidden behind its imposing facade, its dwindling finances concealed by its aura of exclusivity. The perfect metaphor for the world Elsa inhabited. Impressive from the outside, hollow at the core. "I think I'm beginning to understand," I said quietly. She seemed satisfied by this response, mistaking my meaning entirely. "Good. Then you understand. Why this gala is so important to Douglas. Why everything needs to be perfect." After we settled on the navy dress, and matching shoes, clutch, and subtle jewelry that together cost more than 3 months of my mortgage, Elsa insisted on taking me to lunch at the store's restaurant. Over overpriced salads, she shifted to what was clearly her actual agenda. "Douglas mentioned you're considering a Manhattan project," she said, delicately spearing a piece of radicchio. "Something significant." I maintained a neutral expression. "It's still very preliminary." "He worries about you overextending yourself," she continued. "Manhattan development is a different league entirely from Brooklyn renovations." "I'm aware of the differences," I replied evenly. "Of course you are." Her tone was placating. "It's just that Douglas has connections who could guide you. Trey, for instance, has expressed interest in mentoring promising developers. He could introduce you to the right investors, the right architects." "I appreciate the thought," I interrupted, "but I have my own network and my own approach to development that might not align with Trey's vision." Elsa's smile tightened again. I'm only thinking of your best interests. And Douglas's, of course. Now that he's joining the club, his associations will be scrutinized more carefully. Your success reflects on him. And there it was, the real concern. Not my well-being or professional advancement, but how my work might impact Doug's social standing, my projects in Brooklyn, my focus on affordable housing and community spaces, my reputation for prioritizing preservation over profit, all potential embarrassments to the image Doug and Elsa were cultivating. I'll keep that in mind, I said, signaling to the waiter for the check. In the weeks following our shopping expedition, I threw myself into the Hudson Bay Club acquisition with renewed determination. The due diligence process was more complex than any project I'd previously undertaken. Layers of financial records to analyze, structural assessments to review, legal complications to navigate. The club's century-old charter contained restrictive covenants that would need to be carefully addressed in any ownership transition. Meanwhile, Fran managed our Brooklyn renovation, sending daily updates and occasionally pointed reminders that I was stretching myself thin. You can't run two major projects simultaneously, she warned during one of our check-ins. Something will suffer. I've got it under control, I insisted, even as my apartment became a chaotic nest of blueprints, financial projections, and takeout containers. What I didn't have under control was my relationship with Doug. Our text exchanges grew increasingly strained and infrequent. Twice he suggested dinner plans that I had to decline due to late meetings with the Horizon team. When I proposed alternative dates, his responses came days later with vague excuses about work commitments or obligations to Elsa's family. The distance between us expanded into a chasm, seemingly wider each time we interacted. It wasn't just logistics. There was a fundamental tension growing, though Doug couldn't possibly know its true source. 3 weeks before the gala, I received an unexpected call from Trey Caldwell himself. Marla, he boomed through the speaker, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to universal deference. Your brother speaks highly of your development work. I understand you're considering a Manhattan project? My heart stuttered. Had our confidential exploration leaked somehow? I chose my words carefully. I'm always evaluating opportunities, Mr. Caldwell. Trey, please, he corrected smoothly. Listen, I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you. Perhaps over lunch? My club tomorrow at 1? The invitation to the Hudson Bay Club, the very property I was secretly preparing to acquire, carried a surreal irony. Prudence suggested declining, but curiosity won out. What better opportunity? To inspect the property firsthand? I'd be delighted, I responded, adding a note to my calendar while anxiety churned in my stomach. The next day, I arrived at the imposing limestone entrance of the Hudson Bay Club precisely at 1 o'clock. The doorman, a silver-haired man with impeccable posture, examined me with barely concealed skepticism before confirming my appointment. Mr. Caldwell is waiting in the Fitzgerald room, he informed me, summoning a young man in a crisp uniform who led me through the main lobby. Despite having studied the architectural plans extensively, nothing prepared me for the physical reality of the space. Soaring ceilings with elaborate plasterwork, marble floors worn to a soft luster by a century of expensive shoes, mahogany paneling that gleamed with the deep patina only time can create. The atmosphere was hushed, reverent, more cathedral than social club, yet my trained eye caught the subtle signs of deterioration beneath the grandeur. Hairline cracks in the ceiling medallions, water stains artfully concealed behind strategic artwork, a slight unevenness in the floor that suggested settling foundation issues. The Fitzgerald room proved to be a wood-paneled sanctuary overlooking Bryant Park. Trey rose from a leather armchair as I entered, extending his hand with practiced warmth. Marla. Excellent. Right on time. He gestured to the chair opposite his. I've taken the liberty of ordering for us. The club's Dover Soul is not to be missed. I sat, noting the absence of menus or prices, a world where choice was curated and cost irrelevant. Thank you for the invitation. The building is extraordinary. Since 1893, he confirmed with proprietary pride. The membership roster reads like a who's who of American history. Roosevelt was a member, both of them actually. A waiter appeared silently at my elbow, pouring water into a crystal glass while another placed a napkin across my lap. The choreography of service was flawless, practiced over decades. Your brother will be an excellent addition to our ranks, Trey continued. Douglas has the right sensibilities for the club. I smiled noncommittally, wondering what sensibilities meant in this context. Wealth, certainly. Ambition. Willingness to conform. Now, about your Manhattan ambitions, he segued smoothly. Elsa mentioned you're exploring opportunities. I admire entrepreneurial spirit, but Manhattan development is a shark tank for newcomers. The right introductions are essential. I appreciate your concern, I replied carefully. But I've been in real estate development for nearly a decade. I understand. The landscape? Trey's smile remained fixed, but his eyes cooled slightly. Brooklyn brownstones and community centers are charming projects, Marla. But Manhattan is a different ecosystem entirely. The capital requirements alone would be prohibitive without the right partners. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Before I could respond, our first course arrived. A delicate arrangement of seafood that probably cost more than what I typically spent on groceries for a week. I've assembled a list of potential investors who might consider supporting a properly structured project, Trey continued, sliding a folded paper across the table. With my recommendation, of course. I glanced at the list. A who's who of developers known for luxury high-rises and commercial properties that prioritized maximum return over community impact. The exact opposite of my development philosophy. This is thoughtful, I said, tucking the paper into my bag. Though my approach tends toward preservation and mixed-use development rather than luxury conversions. Trey's laugh was indulgent, as if I'd said something charmingly naive. Noble sentiments, but ultimately impractical in this market. Manhattan real estate isn't about sentiment. It's about return on investment. I've found that thoughtful development can achieve both social and financial returns, I countered. A perspective that may work in the boroughs, he acknowledged with the air of someone making a generous concession. But in Manhattan, particularly for someone without established connections, more conventional approaches are advisable. The conversation continued in this vein throughout lunch, Trey alternating between paternalistic advice and subtle reminders of my outsider status in his world. By dessert, his actual message was clear. My development approach was unsuitable for Manhattan. My ambitions overreached my capabilities, and my success depended entirely on connections he could provide. If I adjusted my vision to align with his values. As coffee was served, he shifted topics abruptly. I understand you'll be attending the annual gala as Douglas's guest. I nodded, surprised by the change in subject. Yes, he was kind enough to invite me. The gala is our most significant tradition. We maintain certain standards for the occasion. His gaze drifted briefly to my suit. Well made, but certainly not from the rarefied brands Elsa favored. Elsa mentioned she's helping you prepare. That's wise. The implication that I required assistance to meet their standards stung, but I maintained a pleasant expression. She's been very involved in the process. Douglas is fortunate to have found her, Trey observed. She understands our world intuitively, navigates it flawlessly. Unlike some of us, I suggested, unable to resist the subtle provocation. Trey's smile didn't waver. We each have our natural environments, Marla. The club represents a particular tradition, a specific set of values. Not everyone finds it comfortable, nor should they. Exclusivity is our defining characteristic. And what exactly are you excluding? I asked, meeting his gaze directly. For a moment, surprise flickered across his features. Perhaps at my directness, perhaps at my willingness to challenge the premise of his beloved institution. Then his expression settled back into practiced affability, not excluding, curating, preserving a certain approach to life, business, society, maintaining standards in a world increasingly devoid of them. He set down his coffee cup with precision. Your brother recognizes the value of these traditions, embraces them. It's why he'll thrive here. The subtext was crystal clear. Unlike you. As we concluded lunch, Trey walked me through additional rooms. Of the club, the library with its first edition books no one seemed to read, the billiards room where elderly men played in concentrated silence, the rooftop garden with its spectacular but private view of the city. Each space reinforced the same message. This was a fortress of privilege, beautiful but inaccessible to most. I hope you'll consider my suggestions about your Manhattan aspirations, Trey said as we reached the lobby. With the right guidance, even a developer with your unconventional background could find a foothold. I extended my hand, matching his firm grip. Thank you for lunch, Trey. It's been illuminating. As I descended the limestone steps to the street, leaving the hushed exclusivity behind, I felt something crystallize within me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. The Hudson Bay Club was a perfect symbol of everything wrong with how wealth and power functioned in the city I loved. Beautiful spaces hoarded by few, resources concentrated rather than shared. History preserved but privatized. Whatever hesitation I'd felt about the acquisition evaporated. If the transformation meant disrupting Doug's social aspirations, so be it. Some principles mattered more than family harmony, especially when that harmony was increasingly predicated on my diminishment. The week before the gala, everything began unraveling at once. The Brooklyn project hit a major setback when asbestos was discovered in unexpected areas, requiring additional remediation and pushing our budget into critical territory. Meanwhile, the Hudson Bay Club acquisition entered its final phase, with lawyers drafting purchase agreements and the Horizon team finalizing financing. The dual pressure had me working 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. When Doug called on Tuesday evening, I almost didn't answer. But guilt, that persistent companion in our increasingly strained relationship, made me pick up on the fourth ring. Hey, stranger, he said, his tone attempting lightness but landing somewhere, closer to accusation. Beginning to think you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Sorry, I sighed, rubbing my temples as I stared at the spreadsheets covering my dining table. Work has been overwhelming lately. Too overwhelming for your only brother? Mom would be disappointed. The casual invocation of our mother, dead 15 years now, hit like a low blow. That's not fair, Doug. Neither is being ghosted for weeks. The gala is Saturday. Elsa's been trying to coordinate arrival times with you. I glanced at my phone notifications, seeing 3 missed texts from Elsa that I'd been too busy to address. I've just been swamped with this Brooklyn project. There were complications. There are always complications in your projects, Marla, he interrupted, an edge creeping into his voice. That's the nature of business. But family should still be a priority. The irony of this statement, coming from someone who had gradually deprioritized our relationship over the past 2 years, wasn't lost on me. But exhaustion made me reckless. Like I've been a priority for you since Elsa came into the picture? The words escaped before I could reconsider them. Silence stretched between us, taut and dangerous. Is that what this is about? Doug finally asked, his voice cooler now. You're punishing me because you don't like my wife? This isn't about Elsa, I insisted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's about how our relationship changed when your priorities shifted. My priorities expanded, he corrected. I built a life with someone I love. That doesn't diminish my relationship with you, unless you force that outcome. I closed my eyes, trying to marshal my thoughts. This conversation was veering into territory we'd carefully avoided for years, and my depleted state made me ill-equipped to navigate it diplomatically. Look, I'm sorry I've been hard to reach, I conceded. The gala is important to you and I'll be there. Text me the details and I'll make it work. That's it? Doug pressed. We're overdue for a real conversation, Marla. And we'll have it. But right now, I have contractors waiting on decisions that affect whether dozens of people get paid this week. Can we table this until after the gala? Another silence. This one resigned. Fine. But we're not letting this go. Something's been off between us for too long. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, a familiar guilt settling into my chest. Doug wasn't wrong. Something had been off between us, and it wasn't solely his fault. My resentment of Elsa's influence had created a defensive distance. My judgment of his social climbing had erected barriers. My secret pursuit of the Hudson Bay Club acquisition represented the ultimate betrayal of his trust. For the first time, I confronted the full implications of what I was doing. Within weeks, the club Doug had worked so hard to join, the membership he viewed as the culmination of his social ascent, would be fundamentally transformed. The exclusivity he valued would be dismantled. The traditions he admired would be reimagined, and I would be responsible. I reached for my phone, briefly considering calling Alex to back out of the deal. But the moment passed. The acquisition wasn't just about Doug, or even about my complicated feelings regarding his choices. It was about transforming a space of privilege into something more equitable, more accessible, about preserving architectural heritage while reimagining its purpose for a broader community. My principles against my brother's aspirations. The choice felt impossible, yet I'd already made it. Friday evening, the night before the gala, brought the next crisis. I was at the Brooklyn site, reviewing remediation plans with the environmental team, when Alex called. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. One of the board members leaked information about the acquisition discussions. My stomach dropped. How bad is it? Not catastrophic yet. It's still internal, contained to select club leadership and the membership committee. But the current understanding is incomplete and causing panic. They know there's a buyer, but not our full vision for the space. So they think it's a typical developer planning to gut the place? I asked, already seeing the dominoes falling. Exactly. There's talk of marshaling resources for a competing bid, organizing member opposition. Trey Caldwell is apparently leading the charge. Of course he was. What do? We need to accelerate our timeline. The formal offer goes out Monday morning, before they can organize meaningful resistance, but we should expect the weekend to be turbulent. The implications hit me immediately. The gala is tomorrow night. I know, Alex acknowledged. Probably best to maintain distance from the club until this is resolved. Any chance you can skip it? I closed my eyes, remembering Doug's voice on the phone, his insistence that I be there for this milestone. Not without raising questions I can't answer yet. Then be careful. If Caldwell connects you to Horizon or gets wind of your involvement, I understand. I'll keep a low profile. After hanging up, I leaned against the construction trailer, anxiety churning in my stomach. The timing couldn't be worse. Just as the acquisition reached its most delicate phase, I was expected to spend an evening in the very heart of the institution I was secretly planning to transform, surrounded by people who would view that transformation as an attack on their way of life, including my brother. By Saturday evening, I was a bundle of nerves disguised in expensive navy silk. The dress Elsa had selected hung perfectly. My hair was professionally arranged, my makeup flawless. I looked exactly as she had intended, appropriately elegant, intentionally unmemorable. A suitable sister for a new member, neither embarrassing nor attention-grabbing. Doug and Elsa had arranged for a car service to collect me, another detail ensuring I would arrive exactly as scheduled, neither early enough to wander unsupervised nor late enough to draw notice. The message was clear. My presence was desired but carefully managed. As the car glided toward Midtown, I received a text from Alex. Board emergency meeting in progress. Caldwell rallying opposition. Maintain cover at all costs. My hands trembled slightly as I deleted the message. Whatever was happening behind the scenes at the club, I was now headed directly into its epicenter, carrying secrets that could detonate my brother's social aspirations and possibly our relationship. The car pulled up to the limestone entrance just as Doug and Elsa were arriving in a separate vehicle. Elsa looked stunning in a champagne gown that probably cost more than my car, her hair arranged in an elegant updo that emphasized her swan-like neck. Doug, handsome in his tuxedo, seemed tense but excited, a man on the threshold of achieving something he'd long desired. Right on time, Elsa approved, air-kissing my cheek. The dress is perfect. You look appropriate. From her, this constituted high praise. Doug hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for being here. It means more than you know." His sincerity caught me off guard, stirring a fresh wave of guilt. Whatever our differences, whatever the distance that had grown between us, he genuinely wanted his sister present for this moment. And I was here under false pretenses, harboring plans that would undermine everything this night represented to him. As we ascended the limestone steps toward the entrance, Doug placed a hand on my arm. "Tonight is special, Marla. I want you to see what I've been working toward, to understand why it matters so much." The earnestness in his eyes made my chest ache. "I'm happy for you, Doug. Really. I know we've drifted apart," he continued, his voice low enough that Elsa, walking slightly ahead, couldn't hear. "After tonight, let's fix that. Family is too important." Before I could respond, we reached the top of the steps where Trey Caldwell stood greeting arrivals, his face a mask of cordial hospitality despite whatever turmoil was occurring behind the scenes. "Douglas! Elsa!" he exclaimed warmly. "The hour of celebration has arrived." His gaze shifted to me, and though his smile remained fixed, something cold flickered in his eyes. "And Marla, how nice of you to support your brother on this auspicious occasion." As we stepped across the threshold into the grand lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into the lion's den, carrying secrets that could destroy everything my brother had built, and possibly our relationship along with it. The Burr. Hudson Bay Club's grand ballroom exceeded even the most extravagant spaces I'd encountered in my years of architectural work. Soaring 30-foot ceilings featured hand-painted murals of classical scenes, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that had reportedly once hung in European palaces. Marble columns ringed the perimeter, while the inlaid wood dance floor gleamed, with a mirror-like finish. Every detail exuded calculated opulence, wealth not as comfort but as spectacle. Members and their guests mingled in formal attire, their conversations creating a soft murmur beneath the string quartet's elegant performance. Uniformed staff circulated with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres, appearing and disappearing with practiced invisibility. "Isn't it magnificent?" Elsa whispered, her eyes shining as she surveyed the room. "This is what legacy looks like, Marla. This is what Douglas has achieved." I smiled noncommittally, acutely aware of how differently we perceived the same space. Where she saw the pinnacle of social achievement, I saw wasted potential, a stunning architectural treasure locked away for the enjoyment of a tiny, privileged few. Doug was immediately drawn into conversation with several older men, clearly established members welcoming one of their newly approved peers. I watched as he adopted their mannerisms, the restrained laugh, the slight head tilt that conveyed attentive listening, the casual referencing of shared connections. He moved through this world with increasing fluency, having studied its unwritten language until he could speak it like a native. "Mr. Caldwell would like a word," a staff member murmured at my elbow, startling me from my observations. In the Astor room, just down the corridor. My pulse quickened. Had he somehow discovered my connection to the acquisition? Did he say what about? No, ma'am. Only that it's a private matter. I glanced across the room, catching sight of Doug. Deep in conversation, Elsa holding court with several elegantly dressed women. Neither would notice my brief absence. Of course, I replied, following the staff member out of the ballroom and down a hushed corridor lined with portraits of past club presidents, their stern expressions seeming to judge me as I passed. The Astor room proved to be a smaller, wood-paneled space with a massive fireplace and leather chairs arranged for intimate conversation. Trey stood at a sideboard pouring amber liquid into crystal tumblers. Ah, Marla. Thank you for joining me. He extended a glass. Scotch? Macallan 25. One of life's perfect pleasures. I accepted the glass but didn't drink. You wanted to speak. With me? Directly to the point, he observed with a thin smile. A quality I might admire in different circumstances. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. I remained standing. I should return to my brother soon. The induction ceremony will proceed without disruption, he assured me. We have time for an important conversation. Something in his tone, a dangerous certainty, made me wary. I perched on the edge of a chair, maintaining the posture of someone prepared to leave at any moment. Trey sat opposite me, swirling his scotch thoughtfully. I had an interesting call this afternoon from a colleague at First Manhattan Trust. He mentioned a significant transaction being prepared, financing for a major acquisition in Midtown. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart rate accelerated. The real estate market is always active. Indeed. But this particular transaction caught my attention because the property in question is familiar. His eyes locked with mine. And the acquiring entity traces back to Horizon Capital Partners. The implied knowledge hung between us, neither fully confirmed nor deniable. I took a small sip of scotch, buying seconds to compose my response. Financial matters can be complex, I offered finally. Structures often involve multiple entities for various legitimate purposes. Trey's laugh held no warmth. Let's dispense with the evasions, Marla. I know you're working with Horizon to acquire this club. What I don't know is why. Revenge against your brother? Some misguided social justice crusade? The direct accusation caught me off guard, but I maintained my composure. If such a transaction were occurring, it would be a business decision, not a personal vendetta. Business, he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. This club isn't merely a business. It's an institution, a legacy, something I don't expect you to understand. Perhaps I understand more than you think, I countered. Beautiful spaces should be preserved. We agree on that much. Preserved in their intended purpose, he corrected sharply. Not reimagined according to whatever trendy egalitarian notions you've embraced in your Brooklyn projects. The contempt in his voice when he said Brooklyn might have wounded me. Once. Now it only reinforced my conviction. The world changes, Mr. Caldwell. Adaptation isn't betrayal, it's survival. He set his glass down with controlled precision. Does Douglas know what you're planning? The question I'd been dreading. My professional activities are separate from my family relationships. How convenient for your conscience, he observed, coldly. While you plot to destroy something your brother has worked years to attain, you hide behind professional discretion. His accusations struck closer to my core insecurities than I wanted to admit. I'm not destroying anything. I'm transforming a failing institution into something sustainable. Failing? His eyebrows rose. An interesting perspective on a club with a 3-year waiting list for membership. A club with crumbling infrastructure, depleted reserves, and significant deferred maintenance, I countered. The limestone facade needs complete restoration. The roof is failing. The electrical systems are dangerously outdated. Trey's expression shifted subtly, surprised that I knew these details, quickly masked by renewed confidence. Temporary challenges. That loyal membership will address, as we have for over a century. By continuing to sell off your art collection piece by piece? By depleting your endowment principal? Those aren't sustainable solutions. His eyes narrowed. You've been quite thorough in your espionage. It's called due diligence, standard in any acquisition. Trey leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Let me be perfectly clear, Marla. This acquisition will never happen. I've already activated resources to block it, but more importantly, and I say this out of respect for your brother, I'm giving you an opportunity to withdraw gracefully before Douglas learns of your betrayal. The threat was unmistakable. Are you suggesting you'll tell him if I don't back out? I'm stating it explicitly. Tonight, before he's formally inducted, he'll know exactly what his sister has been planning behind his back. Trey's smile was cold. Imagine that moment, Marla. The public humiliation. The severing of your last family tie. Is that really what you want? The question pierced directly to my deepest fear, losing Doug completely. Despite our differences, despite the growing distance between us, he remained my only family. The thought of his face when he learned what I'd been planning, the shock, the betrayal, the final confirmation that I didn't belong in his world, made my chest constrict painfully. For a moment, I considered conceding. The acquisition wasn't finalized. I could step away, preserve what remained of our relationship, find another project that wouldn't create this impossible conflict. But as I sat in that room, surrounded by the emblems of exclusivity and entrenched privilege, another truth crystallized. This wasn't just about Doug or even about my relationship with him. It was about the fundamental question of who deserved access to beauty, to history, to spaces that shaped the city's identity. It was about whether the architectural treasures of our shared heritage should remain the private domain of a select few, or be reimagined for broader benefit. I understand your position, I said finally, setting my untouched scotch aside and rising to my feet. But I think you misunderstand mine. This isn't about destroying something valuable. It's about preserving it in a way that ensures its future. Trey rose as well, towering over me with practiced intimidation. And Douglas, have you considered what this will do to him? To the relationship you claim to value? The question hit like a physical blow, but I held my ground. I've considered everything, including the possibility that sometimes principles must come before personal comfort. Principles, he scoffed. A convenient shield for actions that will devastate your brother. If understanding my motivations matters to you, I continued, moving toward the door, then know this. I believe beautiful spaces like this club deserve to be shared, not hoarded. I believe historic buildings should be preserved but also reimagined for contemporary relevance. And I believe the value of architectural heritage isn't diminished by making it accessible to more than a privileged few. Trey's expression hardened. Naive platitudes that ignore centuries of tradition. Tradition evolves, I countered. Or it dies. As my hand reached the doorknob, Trey delivered his final salvo. You have until the induction ceremony begins. Approximately 40 minutes. Withdraw from the acquisition, or I tell Douglas everything. I paused, turning back to meet his gaze one last time. Do what you feel you must, Mr. Caldwell. So will I. I stepped back into the corridor, my outward composure masking internal turmoil. The ultimatum left no middle ground, no path of compromise. Either I abandoned a project I believed in deeply, betraying my professional principles and personal values, or I proceeded knowing it would likely shatter my relationship with my only brother. As I moved mechanically back toward the grand ballroom, my mind raced through alternatives, searching for some solution that wouldn't require devastating sacrifice. But each path led to the same impossible choice: Doug or my principles, family harmony or professional integrity. The weight of the decision pressed on me like a physical burden. Whatever I chose in the next 40 minutes would irrevocably shape both my future and my relationship with my brother. And the clock was ticking. I didn't return immediately to the grand ballroom. Instead, I found myself wandering through a quiet corridor of the club, past display cases filled with historical artifacts, vintage photographs of founding members, ancient ledgers recording the first membership rolls, silver trophies from long-forgotten tournaments. In another context, I might have appreciated this careful preservation of history. Now it only emphasized the stark choice before me. My phone vibrated in my clutch. A text from Alex. Board meeting concluded. Caldwell organizing resistance. Need. Your confirmation to proceed with Monday offer. Call when you can. The deadline loomed from both directions. Trey's 40-minute ultimatum and Horizon's need for my final commitment. I slipped into a small alcove with a bay window overlooking Bryant Park and dialed Fran's number. Shouldn't you be watching your brother get his elite membership card or whatever? She answered, the background noise suggesting she was still at our Brooklyn site despite the late hour. I need your perspective, I said, keeping my voice low. I'm in an impossible situation. More impossible than the asbestos remediation budget I'm staring at? Considerably. I explained the confrontation with Trey, the ultimatum, and the choice now facing me. Withdraw from the Hudson Bay Club acquisition, or watch my relationship, with Doug potentially shatter beyond repair. Fran was silent for several moments after I finished. That's genuinely awful, she finally said, her usual sarcasm absent. Tell me what to do, I pleaded, sounding more desperate than I intended. I can't make this call for you, Marla, but I can ask questions to help you think it through. Her voice shifted to the analytical tone she used when dissecting difficult business problems. First, is backing out even viable at this stage? What are the contractual implications? I considered this. We haven't signed final agreements, but we've invested significant resources in due diligence. Horizon would likely proceed without me, though the terms might change. So, practically speaking, your withdrawal wouldn't necessarily stop the acquisition, just remove you from it. Correct. The club's financial situation is too precarious for them to continue indefinitely without intervention. Someone will acquire it eventually. Which means, Fran continued, following the logical thread, your choice isn't really between saving the club or transforming it. It's between being part of the transformation or stepping aside while someone else does it, possibly with less sensitivity to the historical elements you value. This perspective shifted something in my thinking. I hadn't considered that. The club will change regardless. The question is whether I help shape that change. Exactly. Now for the harder question, Doug. If Caldwell tells him about your involvement, is there any chance he'd understand your position? Any chance at all? I closed my eyes, trying to honestly assess my brother's potential reaction. The Doug I grew up with might have. The Doug who exists now, who's invested everything in being accepted by this world. I don't know. Has he ever seen your work up close? Really understood what you do and why it matters? Not in years, I admitted. He knows I renovate buildings, but I don't think he grasps the philosophy behind it, the preservation combined with reimagining, the balance of history and accessibility. So his understanding of your work is as superficial as your understanding of why this club matters to him, Fran observed. The insight struck me forcefully. You think I should talk to him, directly, before Caldwell does. I think hiding things rarely ends well, especially from people you care about. Fran's voice softened. Look, I know how much your principles matter to you, and I respect that. But I also know Doug is your only family. Whatever you decide, make sure you're choosing, with complete awareness of what you might lose. As our call ended, I checked the time. 28 minutes until Trey's deadline expired. 28 minutes to make a decision that would shape both my professional future and my relationship with Doug. I texted Alex. Need more time. Proceeding. As planned, but with potential complications. Will update ASAP. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sought out my brother in a crowded room, not to maintain appearances or fulfill obligations, but because I genuinely needed to speak. With him. I found Doug near one of the ornate fireplaces, engaged in conversation with several other inductees and their sponsors. He looked so at ease, so naturally part of this environment that for a moment I hesitated. Was I really prepared to potentially shatter this world he had worked so hard to join? But as I watched him, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. A slight stiffness in his posture, a careful calculation in his laugh. This wasn't effortless belonging. It was studied performance. He was working to fit in, just as he had been working for years to transform himself into someone who belonged in spaces like this. I caught his eye across the room and gestured subtly toward a quieter corner. He excused himself and made his way. To me, his expression shifting from social affability to genuine concern. Everything okay? You disappeared for a while. I need to talk to you, I said quietly. Privately. It's important. He glanced at his watch, a gesture that once would have been foreign to him. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Can it wait? It really can't. Something in my tone must have conveyed the urgency, because he nodded and guided me toward a dais, small antechamber off the main ballroom. As we entered the more private space, he loosened his bow tie slightly, the first crack in his carefully maintained facade. What's going on, Marla? You look like you've seen a ghost. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words that might build a bridge across the chasm that had formed between us. Do you remember when Dad died, and we stayed up all night in the backyard just talking about him? The unexpected reference caught him off guard. Of course I do. Why, you told me that night that no matter what happened, it would always be you and me against the world. That we were family, and family was the one thing that couldn't be broken. Doug's expression softened. I remember. I need you to remember that person, the brother who said those words, while I tell you something difficult. I met his gaze directly. I'm part of an investment group that's acquiring the Hudson Bay Club. For a moment, he didn't seem to process my words. Then confusion crossed his features. Acquiring. What does that mean? Like membership? No. Purchasing it. The entire property. The club is in financial trouble, Doug. Serious trouble. Deferred maintenance, depleted reserves, mounting operational deficits. They've been hiding it from the membership, but the situation is unsustainable. He shook his head as if to clear. That can't be right. This is one of the most prestigious clubs in Manhattan. They just accepted new members. They are selling art from their collection to cover operating shortfalls, I finished. Are facing millions in critical repairs. They can't afford. Are seeking a buyer who can rescue the building before it's too late. Doug sank into one of the antechamber's velvet chairs, his composure fracturing. How do you know all this? Because I've been doing due diligence for the acquisition for weeks. The Horizon Capital Partners team. Horizon? Recognition flashed in his eyes. Alex Morgan's firm? I nodded, surprised. You know Alex? By reputation, he's known for community-focused development. Doug's gaze sharpened. Which means you're not just buying the club, you're planning to transform it, change its purpose, preserve its architecture while making it more accessible, I corrected. A space that honors its history while serving a broader community. Eliminating it as a private club, he translated, his voice flat. I couldn't sugarcoat this part. Yes, the exclusivity model isn't sustainable. Doug? Not financially and not culturally. He was silent for a long moment, processing. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, what this meant for his carefully constructed social trajectory. for the status he'd worked so hard to attain. "Why are you telling me this now?" he finally asked. "Tonight of all nights?" "Because Trey Caldwell figured it out. He confronted me earlier with an ultimatum. Withdraw from the acquisition or he'll tell you himself publicly before the induction ceremony." Doug's laugh was hollow. "So this isn't about honesty. It's about controlling the narrative." The accusation stung, but I couldn't entirely refute it. "I would have told you eventually, but yes, I wanted you to hear it from me, not from him. And I wanted you to understand why I'm doing this. That it's not about undermining you or your choices." "What is it about then?" There was genuine confusion in his question, not just anger. "It's about believing that beautiful spaces like this shouldn't be hoarded by the few. It's about preserving architectural treasures while making them relevant. For the future." I leaned forward, willing him to understand. "It's the same philosophy that drives all my work, Doug. This isn't a vendetta. It's a natural extension of what I've always done, just on a larger scale." He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "Do you have any idea what this membership means to me? How hard I've worked for this?" "I do," I said softly, "but I also know that you've been working to belong in a world that will never truly accept you or me as equals, no matter how perfectly you play their game." Doug's face flushed at my words, a mixture of anger and something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, flickering across his features. "That's not true. I've earned my place here by becoming someone else," I said gently. "By erasing where we came from. By performing belonging instead of actually belonging." He turned away, straightening his bow tie in a small mirror on the wall, a reflexive gesture of composure. "You don't understand ambition, Marla. Sometimes evolution requires leaving certain things behind. Things? Or people?" The question hung between us, heavy with unspoken history. Doug didn't answer immediately. When he finally turned back to face me, his expression had hardened into something more controlled. "How much time do I have before this becomes public?" "The formal offer will be submitted Monday morning, but if I don't withdraw from the acquisition, in the next—" I checked my watch. 12 minutes. Trey will announce it during the induction ceremony." "Of course he will," Doug muttered. "Maximum humiliation for maximum effect. Classic Trey." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, momentarily disrupting its careful arrangement. "What exactly do you want from me here, Marla? Blessing? Understanding? What?" The question caught me off guard. In my rush to beat Trey's disclosure, I hadn't fully considered what I hoped to achieve beyond controlling how Doug learned the truth. "I want you to know this isn't about hurting you," I said finally. "I want you to understand that my work, preserving beautiful spaces while making them accessible, matters to me as much as your career matters to you. And I want—" I hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want us to find a way to be family again, despite our different paths." Doug's laugh held no humor. "You're asking for reconciliation while actively undermining everything I've worked for?" "I'm asking you to see that your worth isn't defined by membership in an exclusive club. That the brother I knew valued substance over status." I took a step toward him. The Doug I grew up with would have questioned why beautiful spaces should be reserved for the few. He would have seen the hypocrisy in celebrating architectural heritage while restricting who gets to experience it. The Marla I grew up with would have supported her brother's aspirations, not sabotaged them, he countered. The accusation hit its mark. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Sabotaging you?" "What would you call it? You knew how important this membership was to me. You sat through dinners where I talked about it. You let Elsa help you dress for tonight, all while secretly planning to eliminate the very institution I was joining." His voice tightened. "If that's not sabotage, what is it?" Before I could respond, the door opened and Elsa appeared, elegant as ever. but with an undercurrent of tension. There you are. Everyone's gathering for the ceremony. Trey is looking for both of you. Her gaze shifted between us, registering the obvious conflict. What's happening? Doug and I locked eyes, a silent communication passing between us, the kind only siblings share after decades of understanding each other's unspoken thoughts. I saw calculation in his expression, then decision. Nothing important, he said smoothly, his social mask sliding back into place. Marla had some concerns about a development project. We'll continue the discussion later. Elsa looked skeptical, but accepted his explanation. Well, whatever it is, we'll have to wait. The ceremony starts in 5 minutes, and Trey specifically asked that the whole family be present. As she turned to leave, expecting us to follow, Doug caught my arm. This isn't over, he whispered. But I won't let Trey control this narrative. Or you. We handle this as a family first. The unexpected solidarity, temporary and fragile as it might be, caught me by surprise. Despite everything, some core of our connection remained, some instinctive circling of wagons against outside threats. We followed Elsa back to the grand ballroom, where members and guests had arranged themselves in a ceremonial formation. The inductees and their sponsors stood at the center, with family members positioned prominently nearby. Trey, wearing an elaborate medallion that presumably signified his authority as chairman, stood before a podium bearing the club's crest. His eyes narrowed slightly when he saw me enter with Doug and Elsa, clearly expecting me to have fled after our confrontation. I met his gaze steadily, offering no reaction to his subtle threats. As the ceremony began, with Trey delivering flowery remarks about tradition and exclusivity that now rang especially hollow, I surreptitiously texted Alex. Proceeding as planned. Prepare for turbulence. The induction ritual itself was elaborate and archaic, new members receiving antique keys to the club, reciting pledges of loyalty to its traditions, signing the leather-bound membership book that had recorded generations of Manhattan's elite. Under different circumstances, I might have found it absurdly theatrical. Now, watching Doug perform each ceremonial step with practiced gravity, I felt only a complex sadness. When Doug's name was called, he stepped forward with Trey as his sponsor. I watched Trey's face carefully as he placed a hand on my brother's shoulder, wondering if he would choose this moment for his threatened revelation. Douglas Harrington, Trey announced, using the more formal version of my brother's name, another small erasure of his origins. It is my honor to welcome you to the Hudson Bay Club, an institution that has stood for excellence and tradition for over a century. He paused, his gaze flicking briefly to where I stood. I felt my breath catch, certain this was the moment he would expose my involvement in the acquisition, publicly humiliating Doug and fracturing our relationship beyond repair. But Doug spoke first. Thank you, Trey, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. It's a privilege to join an institution with such rich history. My family has always valued preservation, of relationships, of heritage, of beauty worth protecting. As he said family, his eyes met mine briefly, conveying a message I couldn't fully decipher. Was it reconciliation? Warning? Something else? Entirely? Trey seemed momentarily thrown by Doug's interruption, but recovered quickly. Indeed, preservation is our highest calling. Another pointed glance in my direction. Maintaining our traditions unchanged for future generations. Traditions evolve? Doug countered smoothly, echoing my earlier words to Trey without knowing it. The true test of an institution's strength is how it adapts while honoring its core values. A subtle murmur rippled through the assembled members. This wasn't the typical acceptance speech, brief, deferential, grateful. Doug was challenging the chairman, however politely, during his own induction. Trey's smile tightened. Well said. Now, if you'll sign the membership book. The ceremony continued without Trey making his threatened revelation. Whether Doug's Unexpected assertiveness had thrown him off balance, or he was simply biding his time for maximum impact. I couldn't be sure. But as the formal portion concluded and guests began moving toward the adjoining dining room for the celebratory dinner, I knew the danger hadn't passed. I intercepted Doug as he finished receiving congratulations from a group of older members. "That was unexpected," I murmured. "Almost sounded like you were questioning the club's approach to tradition." His expression was unreadable. Maybe I was. "Doug, not here." He cut me off quietly. "Meet me on the rooftop garden in 15 minutes. We need to talk privately." Before I could respond, Elsa appeared at his side, threading her arm through his possessively. "Everyone's moving to dinner," she informed him, her smile fixed. "Trey wants you at the head table." "I'll be there shortly," Doug assured her. "I need a moment with my sister first." Elsa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose fractionally. "Now? Douglas, this isn't the time for family matters. The board members are waiting." "They can wait a few more minutes," he replied, a firmness in his voice I hadn't heard him use with her before. "This is important." She hesitated, clearly torn between social protocol and the unexpected assertion from her usually acquiescent husband. "Fine," she finally conceded. "But don't be long. Tonight is crucial for your standing." As she glided away, Doug turned back to me. 15 minutes, the rooftop, and Marla." His expression softened momentarily. "Remember what Dad used to say about impossible problems?" The reference startled me. Our father, a mathematics teacher with a philosopher's heart, had a favorite saying when we faced seemingly insurmountable challenges. "There's always another angle. You just haven't found it yet." For the first time, that evening, something like hope flickered in my chest. Whatever Doug wanted to discuss on the rooftop, he was approaching it with our father's problem-solving spirit rather than the rigid thinking he'd adopted in recent years. Perhaps there was a way forward that didn't require devastating sacrifices. Perhaps there was, indeed, another angle we hadn't yet considered. I made my way to the rooftop garden exactly 15 minutes later, slipping away from the dining room where the celebration was in full swing. The elevator operator raised an eyebrow. At my destination, the roof was apparently closed for the evening, but didn't question me when I mentioned my brother's name. The garden was breathtaking even in the darkness. Carefully pruned topiaries created intimate seating areas, while climbing roses and wisteria draped over pergolas that framed spectacular views of the city skyline. Soft landscape lighting illuminated stone paths, winding between reflecting pools and classical statuary. Like everything else in the Hudson Bay Club, it was beautiful, refined, and completely inaccessible to the general public. Doug stood at the far edge, gazing out at the illuminated spire of the Empire State Building. He'd removed his bow tie and unfastened his top button, small rebellions against the formal perfection the evening demanded. "I used to dream about views like this," he said without turning as I approached. "When we were kids, remember how we'd ride the elevator to the top floor of that department store downtown just to see the city spread out below? Dad would pretend we were shopping, but really, he was giving us a glimpse of something beyond our reach." The memory struck me with unexpected force. Our father, always finding small ways to expand our horizons despite limited means. I remember, he wanted us to believe we belonged anywhere, even in places that seemed beyond our reach. Doug nodded, finally turning to face me. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About what belonging really means. And what conclusions have you reached?" "That I'm not sure anyone truly belongs here." He gestured around the rooftop garden. "Not really. We're all performing to some degree, some more convincingly than others." The admission surprised me. "That's not what I expected you to say." "It's not what I expected to realize." He leaned against the stone balustrade. "Marla, I didn't bring you up here to fight about the acquisition. I brought you here because I think there might be another approach, one that serves both our interests." Hope. flickered again. I'm listening. The Hudson Bay Club needs financial rescue. That's clear now, though I wish I'd known before investing a small fortune in membership fees. His wry smile reminded me of the brother I'd grown up with. You want to preserve the building while making it more accessible. I understand that impulse, even if it conflicts with my current position. And the other members? Trey? They'll fight the acquisition aggressively. They'll try, Doug acknowledged, but their position is weaker than they realize. The financial situation is dire, as you've discovered. And if current members learn how the board has mismanaged things, there could be internal revolt. So what's your proposal? He straightened, shifting into the business mode I recognized from when he discussed his financial deals. A compromise. Instead of eliminating the private club entirely, transform it into a hybrid model. Preserve certain spaces for members. Perhaps this rooftop, some private dining rooms, the library, while opening the grand public spaces to broader use. A membership within a public institution, I translated. Exactly. The ballroom becomes a concert venue or event space. The ground floor opens as a public restaurant or cultural center. The membership retains exclusive access to certain amenities, but the building's most significant architectural features become accessible to everyone. I considered the concept, mentally reconfiguring the building's layout. It could work architecturally. The design already creates natural divisions between public and private spaces. And it addresses both our concerns, Doug continued. The building is preserved and becomes more accessible, fulfilling your mission. The membership retains some exclusivity and special access, preserving what they value most. And the combined revenue streams, public access and membership fees, create financial sustainability. The proposal was elegant, balancing competing interests while honoring the building's architectural integrity. It wasn't perfect from either perspective. The purists on both sides would object, but it offered a path forward that didn't require complete victory for either approach. Alex might be open to this, I said carefully. The financial model would need adjustment, but the core concept is sound. And it gives everyone a face-saving way forward, Doug added. The board can present it as evolution rather than capitulation. The membership retains status while the institution gains stability. I studied my brother with new appreciation. You came up with this in the last hour? His smile held a hint of the cockiness I remembered from our youth. Finance is about finding opportunities others miss. This is just another deal structure, one where everyone gets most of what they want. Including you? What about your membership? Your standing with Elsa's crowd? Something shifted in his expression. Let me worry about that. Some things are more important than social position. Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened behind us, and Trey emerged onto the rooftop, his face tight with controlled anger. I should have known, he said coldly. Conspiring while the celebration continues without you. How perfectly fitting. Doug straightened, his posture shifting back to the poised confidence he'd cultivated for this world. Trey, we were just discussing potential solutions to the club's financial challenges. Were you indeed? Trey's voice dripped with disdain. How thoughtful of you to concern yourselves with matters beyond your understanding. I understand balance sheets quite well, Doug replied evenly. And failing infrastructure. And depleted reserves, Trey's eyes narrowed. So she's shared her ill-gotten information. I expected nothing less. The information isn't the problem, Trey. The financial mismanagement is. Doug's tone remained measured, but there was steel beneath the surface. How long did you think you could hide it? Another year? 2? Before the limestone started falling? Onto Madison Avenue? Temporary challenges that loyal membership would address if given the chance, Trey insisted, echoing his earlier words to me. By doubling dues? Tripling them? The numbers don't work, Doug countered. The membership can't support the necessary capital investments. You know that. Trey's composure cracked slightly, revealing the desperation beneath. What I know is that your sister has engineered a hostile takeover of a historic institution, and you appear to be aiding her betrayal. The board will never accept this. The board might prefer a compromise to bankruptcy, I suggested. Doug has outlined an approach that preserves member benefits while creating a sustainable future for the building. Compromise. Trey spat the word like it tasted bitter. This club has never compromised its standards in over a century. We don't adapt to changing fashions or surrender to popular pressure. Then you'll cease to exist, Doug said simply. Buildings without maintenance collapse eventually. Institutions without evolution become irrelevant. Trey took a step closer, his height allowing him to look down at Doug with practiced intimidation. You've made your choice, it seems, siding with your sister against the very institution that welcomed you today. I expected better judgment from someone with your ambitions. I'm siding with reality, Doug replied, and proposing a solution that serves everyone's interests. Not mine, Trey declared, and not the true membership's. We will fight this acquisition with every resource at our disposal. Legal challenges, regulatory obstacles, public relations, warfare. Your sister's company will be drained in litigation before the first architectural plans are drawn. I tensed, recognizing the genuine threat in his words. A prolonged legal battle could indeed drain our resources, potentially endangering not just the Hudson Bay project, but our Brooklyn renovations as well. But Doug didn't flinch. That would be unwise, Trey, especially when the alternative is a structured transition that preserves your status and legacy. My legacy will not be the chairman who surrendered the Hudson Bay Club to outsiders, Trey retorted. No, Doug agreed, his voice cooling. Your legacy will be the chairman who concealed financial mismanagement until the institution collapsed. Because if you fight this, I will ensure every member knows exactly how the board has jeopardized the club's future through negligence and secrecy. The threat hung in the air between them, a gauntlet thrown in the rarefied atmosphere of the rooftop garden. I watched Trey's expression shift as he recalculated, weighing the personal risk against his institutional loyalty. This isn't over, he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. The membership committee will convene tomorrow to review your induction in light of this development. I wouldn't count on retaining your newly acquired status. That's your prerogative, Doug replied with surprising equanimity. Some things matter more than membership cards. Trey turned to me, contempt evident in his gaze. And you. The board will hear about your duplicity. Your reputation in Manhattan development circles will never recover. I met his gaze steadily. My reputation is built on preserving beautiful buildings while making them relevant for the future. This project only strengthens that legacy. Trey's laugh was bitter. Such noble sentiments. We'll see how they hold up under the reality of what you've set in motion. He straightened his jacket. With a practiced gesture of composure, the induction dinner continues. Your absence has been noted. I suggest you return immediately, or don't return at all. With that, he turned and strode back to the elevator, his rigid posture betraying the anger beneath his controlled exterior. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I turned to Doug. That went well. His unexpected laughter broke the tension. About as well as could be expected. Trey's never faced opposition from within the ranks before. He doesn't quite know how to handle it. He'll retaliate, I warned. Your membership is ultimately less important than I thought. Doug's expression sobered. What matters now is finding a path forward that preserves both the building and whatever relationship we still have as siblings. The simple statement, acknowledging our relationship as a priority, eased something tight within my chest. So we present the hybrid model to Horizon and the board as a compromise solution? It's worth trying. And if they reject it? He shrugged. a gesture reminiscent of our father, we moved to more aggressive approaches. The "we" didn't escape my notice. Somehow, in the crucible of this crisis, my brother had begun finding his way back to me, and perhaps to himself. The next morning found Doug and me in my Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by architectural drawings, financial projections, and half-empty coffee cups. We'd been working since dawn, refining the hybrid model concept into a formal proposal that could withstand scrutiny from both Horizon's investment team and the Hudson Bay Club's board. "The financial structure is sound," Doug declared, reviewing the spreadsheets he'd created overnight. "Combining member dues with public access revenue actually improves the long-term sustainability metrics compared to either model alone." I nodded, studying the modified floor plans where I'd sketched the proposed divisions between public and private spaces. "And architecturally, it works beautifully. The building was originally designed with natural transitions between grand public areas and more intimate private spaces." The doorbell interrupted our concentration. I opened it to find Fran and Alex, both looking equally surprised to see Doug sitting at my dining table amidst the project documents. "This is unexpected," Fran said as they entered, eyeing Doug warily. "A lot has happened since yesterday," I explained, making quick introductions. Alex extended his hand to Doug with professional courtesy. "I know you by reputation only. Your work at Atlantic Capital Partners is impressive." "As is yours at Horizon," Doug replied, the two men assessing each other with the careful neutrality of potential allies who might easily become adversaries. "Doug has a compromise proposal," I explained, gesturing to the documents spread across the table. "A hybrid model that preserves elements of the private club while opening the most significant spaces to public access." Fran raised an eyebrow. "And you're on board with this now, despite your membership?" "Priorities evolve," Doug said simply. Alex moved directly to the financial projections, his expression thoughtful as he reviewed Doug's work. "This is intriguing. The dual revenue streams address our concerns about sustainability. And the phased implementation reduces initial capital requirements," Doug pointed out. "You can open the public spaces first, generating revenue while renovating the private areas." The discussion quickly became technical as we delved into the details of the proposal: construction timelines, membership structures, preservation requirements, community programming. Doug's financial expertise complemented Alex's development experience, while Fran's pragmatism kept our more ambitious ideas grounded in reality. 2 hours later, we had a framework that seemed viable from all perspectives: financially sound, architecturally appropriate, and aligned with both Horizon's community-focused mission and the membership's desire for exclusivity. "There's just one major obstacle," Alex observed, leaning back in his chair: "Trey Caldwell and the current board. After last night's confrontation, they'll oppose this aggressively." "They might," Doug agreed, "but their position isn't as strong as they believe. The financial situation is worse than most members realize." "You're suggesting leveraging that information?" Alex asked carefully. Doug nodded. "Strategic transparency. If the full membership understood the extent of the deferred maintenance and financial mismanagement, they might pressure the board to consider alternatives." "That's playing hardball," Fran observed. "Are you prepared for the blowback? These are your social peers now." Something shifted in Doug's expression, a clarity I hadn't seen in years. "They were never really my peers. I was just willing to pay the price of admission." His phone buzzed with an incoming call from Elsa. He glanced at it, hesitated, then silenced the ringer. "That's the fourth call this morning. I should probably deal with this soon." "She doesn't know you're here?" I asked. "She doesn't know any of it yet," he admitted. "I told her I had early meetings." "Which is technically true." I exchanged glances with Fran, who raised an eyebrow in silent question. Elsa's reaction to Doug's involvement would be another significant hurdle. "You'll need to tell her eventually," I pointed out gently. "I know. But first, we need to solidify our approach to the board. He turned to Alex. When is your offer scheduled? To be submitted? Tomorrow morning, formally. But we could delay if this hybrid model requires substantial revision to the terms. Doug shook his head. No delay. If anything, we accelerate. The longer this plays out, the more opportunity for opposition to organize. What are you suggesting? Alex asked. A two-pronged approach, Doug explained, shifting into the strategic mode that had made him successful in finance. First, submit. The original offer as planned, your complete acquisition with transformation into a public space. That establishes your position and creates urgency. And second, I prompted, I approach key board members today, not Trey, but the more pragmatic directors, with our hybrid proposal as a potential compromise. Position it as a reasonable alternative that preserves the club's essential character while addressing the financial crisis. Alex nodded slowly, appreciating the strategy. Create pressure with the acquisition offer, then present the hybrid model as the reasonable middle ground. Exactly. Basic negotiation tactics, Doug confirmed. When facing a significant change, people often embrace a compromise they would have rejected outright if presented initially. Will the board even take your call after last night? Fran asked skeptically. Some will. I've built relationships with several directors through my work, and they're business people first. They'll listen to a viable financial solution regardless of personal feelings. I studied my brother with a mixture of admiration and wariness. This was the Doug I remembered, strategic, determined, resourceful, but applied to a cause I hadn't expected him to champion. What about Elsa? I asked, the question unavoidable. Where does she fit in this approach? Doug's expression tightened. That's complicated. Her social standing is deeply tied to the club's traditional model. She won't support this transformation. Easily. That's an understatement, I observed. This directly contradicts everything she values about the institution. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of genuine stress I hadn't seen him allow himself in years. But some principles are worth the personal cost. The phrase hung in the air between us, carrying weight beyond the immediate situation. For years, I had watched my brother compromise his authentic self to gain acceptance in Elsa's world. Now, faced with a direct conflict between that carefully constructed persona and his deeper values, he seemed to be choosing the latter, with all the personal consequences that might entail. We should move quickly, Alex suggested, gathering the documents. I'll take these to our legal team to incorporate the hybrid model as an alternative proposal. If you can make inroads with receptive board members today, we'll be positioned to present a unified approach by tomorrow. As Alex and Fran prepared to leave, Doug's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Elsa that he couldn't ignore. Where are you? The membership committee is meeting at noon. Trey says it's urgent. Call me immediately. Doug showed me the message, his expression resolute despite the clear tension. The lines are being drawn. Trey's moving faster than I expected. Are you prepared for what this might cost you? I asked quietly after Fran and Alex had departed. Not just the membership, but potentially your marriage? He looked up from his phone, his expression complex. Do you remember what Dad said when I got that scholarship to Princeton? When I was worried about leaving you and him behind? The memory surfaced immediately. Our father sitting on the edge of Doug's bed, his expression warm with pride and sadness. He said, the hardest choices are the ones where something valuable must be sacrificed for something essential. Doug nodded. I've spent years pursuing what seemed valuable. Maybe it's time to remember what's essential. The simple statement, echoing our father's wisdom, created a lump in my throat. This was the brother I'd missed, the one who could distinguish between superficial achievement and deeper meaning. So what's our next move? I asked, pushing aside the emotion to focus on the immediate strategy. Doug checked his watch. I make some calls to sympathetic board members before the membership committee meets. You update Horizon on our approach. We reconvene here at 3 to compare notes and adjust our strategy. And Elsa? I'll deal with Elsa, he said, his voice firm despite the apprehension in his eyes. Some conversations can only be delayed, not avoided. As he gathered his things to leave, he paused at the door. Whatever happens with the club, with Elsa, with any of it, I'm glad we're on the same side again, Marla. I've missed my sister. The simple acknowledgement, offered without pretense or calculation, was perhaps the most significant breakthrough of the morning. The first step in rebuilding a relationship that had been crumbling under the weight of different values and diverging paths. I've missed you too, I replied, the words inadequate for the complex emotions behind them. As the door closed behind him, I turned back to the apartment filled with plans and projections. Whatever happened next, something essential had already been reclaimed, a connection that ran deeper than social status or professional achievement. A reminder that some bonds, though stretched and tested, retain their fundamental strength. By 3 o'clock, dark clouds had gathered over Brooklyn, both literally and figuratively. Rain lashed against my apartment windows as I paced the living room, waiting for Doug to return from his meeting with the club's membership committee. The preliminary call with Horizon's legal team had gone well. They were incorporating the EA hybrid model as an alternative proposal, but without Doug's report on the board members' receptiveness, we were operating in the dark. When my buzzer finally sounded, I rushed to let him in. Doug appeared in my doorway, soaked from the rain, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his expression grim. "That bad?" I asked, handing him a towel. "Worse." He ran the towel over his hair, which had reverted to its natural waves without the usual styling products, a small detail that made him look more like the brother I remembered. Trey moved faster than anticipated. The membership committee voted to suspend my induction pending review. Can they do that? You were formally inducted last night. Apparently there's a clause about membership obtained under false pretenses. His laugh held no humor. The irony being that the actual false pretenses were on their side, hiding the club's financial situation from prospective members. I guided him to the kitchen table where I'd prepared coffee. What about the board members you contacted? Any traction with the hybrid proposal? Mixed results. 2 directors expressed interest. They recognize the financial reality and see the hybrid model as a potential solution. 3 others defer completely to Trey. The remaining 4 are withholding judgment, waiting to see formal proposals. So not a complete rejection, I observed. No, but Trey has consolidated his position. He's framing this as an existential threat to the club's identity, outsiders with no appreciation for tradition attempting a hostile takeover. And Elsa? I asked carefully. Doug's expression tightened. She's firmly aligned with Trey. When I explained my involvement in the hybrid proposal, He trailed off, staring into his coffee. She what? She gave me an ultimatum. Either I withdraw completely from the Brooklyn scheme, as she calls it, or she'll need to reconsider our future. The pain in his voice was evident despite his attempt at clinical distance. I reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. I'm sorry, Doug. I never wanted this to cost you your marriage. It's not your fault, he sighed. This situation has just brought existing fissures to the surface. Elsa and I have been performing a carefully choreographed dance for years. Me, becoming who she needed me to be. Her shape-shifting me into the perfect husband for her world. It was sustainable as long as no fundamental values were challenged. The frank assessment surprised me. I'd suspected as much, but had never expected Doug to acknowledge it so directly. What happens next? I asked. Trey has called an emergency. Board meeting for 5 o'clock at the club. All major stakeholders will be present. The full board, key committee chairs, legal counsel. Alex has been invited to present Horizon's acquisition offer. And you? I've been summoned as well, Doug. Confirmed. Ostensibly to explain my conflicted position, but really to face a public rebuke. What about me? Should I attend to represent our side of the hybrid proposal? Doug hesitated. Trey specifically excluded you. He's framing you as the hostile element in this equation. Of course he is, I muttered. The exclusion stung, but wasn't surprising. Doug checked his watch. We have 90 minutes before the meeting. Alex is bringing the finalized proposal documents to the club. I should change and prepare. He gestured ruefully at his rain-soaked clothing. I nodded, moving to my bedroom closet. I still have some of your clothes from when you stayed here after Dad died. The suit might be outdated, but it's dry. As Doug changed, I called Fran to update her on the developments. It's coming to a head faster than we expected, I explained. The board meeting at 5 will likely determine the direction of the entire project. And you're just going to let them exclude you? Fran's indignation was evident. It's your vision, your project. Doug may be your brother, but he came to this yesterday. You've been developing this concept for months. She wasn't wrong. I know, but forcing my way in might only harden their opposition. Doug and Alex can represent the hybrid model effectively. Or, Fran countered, you could remind them who actually owns the building. I paused, confused. What do you mean? The club owns the building. That's the whole point of the acquisition. Check your email, Fran instructed. I just forwarded something from our real estate attorney that you need to see immediately. I opened my laptop, finding the email with a detailed legal memorandum attached. As I skimmed the document, my heart began racing. Is this verified? I asked Fran, struggling to process the implications. Triple-checked, she confirmed. The attorney discovered it during final title review this morning. It changes everything. When Doug emerged from my bedroom in his old suit, slightly less fashionable than his current wardrobe but still presentable, he found me staring at my laptop with an expression that made him pause. What is it? He asked cautiously. The Hudson Bay Club doesn't own their building, I said slowly, still absorbing. The revelation. They haven't since 1978. That's impossible, Doug protested. The club is synonymous with that building. They've occupied it for over a century. Occupancy isn't ownership, I explained, turning the laptop so he could see the legal documents. In 1978, facing financial difficulties similar to their current situation, the club sold the building to a real estate holding company called Madison Heritage Partners. They retained a long-term lease with an option to repurchase, but they never exercised it. Doug scanned the documents, his financial acumen allowing him to quickly grasp the implications. Madison Heritage Partners. Who are they? A subsidiary of Whitmore Enterprises, I replied. Lucas Whitmore's family company. Lucas Whitmore, Doug repeated. The name sounds familiar. It should. He's the person who invited me to the gala, the invitation I showed when they tried to turn me away. Recognition dawned on Doug's face. The elderly gentleman who spoke to you briefly during cocktails? I assumed he was just being polite. He wasn't being polite. He was checking in with his tenant. I pulled up another document. Lucas Whitmore is the majority owner of the building, and according to their lease agreement, the club's failure to maintain the property constitutes a material breach that could terminate their occupancy rights entirely. Doug sank into a chair, processing this game-changing information. So Horizon isn't actually acquiring the building from the club. They need to negotiate with Whitmore Enterprises. Exactly. And Lucas Whitmore has apparently been quietly supportive of community-focused development for years. He's funded several of Horizon's past projects as a silent partner. Does Alex know this? According to Fran, he's being briefed right now, I confirmed. This completely reshapes our approach to the, board meeting. The club isn't negotiating from a position of strength. They're potentially facing eviction for lease violations. Doug's strategic mind immediately began recalibrating. This changes our leverage entirely. Instead of positioning the hybrid model as a compromise to save their club, we present it as a generous accommodation despite their lease violations. Exactly. But first, I need to confirm something. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd only used once before. Lucas Whitmore answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the refined cadence of old New York wealth. Marla Chen, I was wondering when you'd call. Mr. Whitmore, I replied, putting the call on speaker so Doug could hear. I believe we have matters to discuss regarding the Hudson Bay Club property. Indeed we do, he confirmed, a smile evident in his voice. I've been watching your work for several years. Your restoration of the Greenpoint Theater was particularly impressive. Thank you. I've just learned that Whitmore Enterprises owns the club building. That information wasn't disclosed during our due diligence process. An intentional omission, I'm afraid. I needed to see how events would unfold naturally. Whether the club's leadership would address their challenges ethically, or continue their pattern of concealment and mismanagement. And have you reached a conclusion? I asked. I have. Trey Caldwell and his faction are stewards of exclusivity, not of architectural heritage. They've neglected the building while clinging to outdated social hierarchies. It's time for a change, Doug. Leaned closer to the phone. Mr. Whitmore, this is Douglas Harrington, Marla's brother. Ah, the newest inductee, Lucas observed. Or perhaps not, given recent developments. Your speech during the ceremony was most interesting. You were there? Doug asked, surprised. I attend every year, though few recognize me now. Age renders one conveniently invisible in certain circles. His chuckle carried decades of observation. I was particularly interested in your comments about evolution while honoring core values. It suggested a perspective I've long hoped might emerge within the membership. We've developed a hybrid model, I explained, preserving elements of the club while opening the significant public spaces for community access. Would that approach interest Whitmore Enterprises? It aligns perfectly with my vision, Lucas confirmed. I've waited decades for the right team to implement such a transformation. The club's current financial crisis simply provided the necessary catalyst. The board is meeting at 5 to discuss Horizon's acquisition offer, Doug informed him. They don't yet know about the actual ownership structure, an oversight that should be corrected, Lucas observed mildly. Perhaps it's time I attended a board meeting. I believe my lease gives me that right, particularly when matters affecting the property are under discussion. The implications of Lucas Whitmore, the actual building owner, appearing at the emergency board meeting were significant. It would fundamentally shift the power dynamics, transforming what Trey had orchestrated as a rejection of outside influence into a confrontation with the property's true authority. Would you be willing to support the hybrid model publicly? I asked. My dear, I would be delighted to do more than that, Lucas replied. Shall we reconvene at the club at 4:45? I believe we have a rather important meeting to attend. The Hudson Bay Club's boardroom matched the institution's overall aesthetic. Ornate woodwork, oil paintings of stern-faced former chairmen, and an enormous mahogany table that dominated the space. When Doug and I arrived with Lucas Whitmore precisely at 5 o'clock, the room was already filled with board members, legal counsel, and Alex representing Horizon Capital Partners. Trey Caldwell's expression upon seeing me enter, the hostile element he had specifically excluded, shifted from surprise to controlled anger. The appearance of Lucas Whitmore, however, seemed to genuinely confuse him. Mr. Whitmore, he acknowledged with forced courtesy. This is an internal club matter. I'm not sure. On the contrary, Lucas interrupted smoothly. As the owner of this building, I consider it very much my concern. A murmur rippled through the assembled board members. Trey's complexion reddened slightly. There seems to be some confusion. The Hudson Bay Club has owned this property since 1893. Until 1978, Lucas corrected. nodding to his attorney who distributed copies of the building's deed and lease agreement. When financial mismanagement remarkably similar to your current situation forced the club to sell the building to my family's company while retaining occupancy rights. The room fell silent as directors quickly scanned the documents, their expressions shifting from disbelief to concern as the legal reality became clear. "This is absurd," Trey finally sputtered. "If this arrangement existed, the board would have been informed." "Previous boards were fully informed," Lucas replied calmly. "The information was simply de-emphasized over time, presumably to maintain the illusion of undiminished prestige." The strategic miscalculation was catastrophic for Trey's position. He had convened this meeting to consolidate opposition to our proposal, only to discover that the club's negotiating leverage had evaporated entirely. "Furthermore," Lucas continued, Section 14.2 of the lease specifies that failure to maintain the property constitutes material breach. The deferred maintenance, currently estimated at approximately $16 million, provides grounds for lease termination if not addressed. Trey's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, likely confirming the validity of Lucas's claim. The board members exchanged alarmed glances, their united front fracturing as the implications became clear. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Whitmore?" asked one of the older directors, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. "I'm suggesting that we have a shared interest in preserving this architectural treasure while ensuring its sustainable future," Lucas replied. "Fortunately, Ms. Chen and her team have developed a thoughtful approach that balances preservation with evolution." He nodded to me, ceding the floor. Every eye in the room turned in my direction, including Doug's, whose subtle nod conveyed both encouragement and pride. I stepped forward, suddenly aware that this moment represented everything I'd worked toward. In my career, the opportunity to transform a magnificent building from an exclusionary space into one that honored its history while serving a broader community. "The building deserves to be preserved," I began, my voice finding strength and conviction. "Its architectural significance extends beyond the membership. The hybrid model we're proposing maintains the club's presence while opening significant portions of the building for public use and appreciation." For the next 15 minutes, I outlined our vision. The grand ballroom transformed into a performance venue. The ground floor reopened as a public restaurant showcasing the original architectural details. The magnificent library preserved as a private club space, but with scheduled public access for architectural tours and educational programs. Most importantly, I concluded, this approach creates financial sustainability through diversified revenue streams. The club continues as a more focused entity within a broader cultural institution, maintaining its legacy while evolving for the future. When I finished, the room remained silent for several moments. Then, one of the directors, a woman who had initially expressed interest in Doug's overtures, spoke up. "This approach preserves what matters most about the club while addressing our financial reality. I believe we should consider it seriously." "Consider surrendering our autonomy?" Trey countered, attempting to rally opposition. "Diluting our exclusivity? Becoming a sideshow in our own building?" "Consider surviving," Doug interjected, his voice carrying the quiet authority he'd developed in his financial career. "The alternative isn't maintaining the status quo, Trey. It's lease termination and complete displacement." Lucas nodded agreement. "I've been patient for decades, hoping the club would evolve naturally. That patience has limits. Ms. Chen's proposal represents the best opportunity to honor this building's heritage while securing its future." The strategic dynamics had shifted completely. What had begun as Trey's show of force against outside influence had transformed into a negotiation for the club's very survival. Several directors who had arrived prepared to reject any change now sat quietly calculating the new reality. "I propose we put Ms. Chen's hybrid model to a formal vote," suggested one of the directors who had initially expressed interest to Doug. "After appropriate review of the details, of course." "Seconded," added another, clearly recognizing which. Way the wind was blowing, Trey's face had settled into a mask of rigid control, his position crumbling before his eyes. "This isn't over," he muttered, just loudly enough for me to hear as the meeting adjourned with plans to reconvene after a thorough review of the proposal. I caught Doug's eye across the room, exchanging a look that acknowledged both our professional victory and the personal reconciliation it had unexpectedly facilitated. Whatever happened next, the transformation of the Hudson Bay Club and of our relationship had been set in motion. 3 weeks later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I stood in the Hudson Bay Club's grand ballroom watching as workers carefully removed protective coverings from the restored ceiling mural. Scaffolding still dominated portions of the space, but already the room was reawakening. Light streaming through cleaned windows, the original parquet floor emerging from beneath decades of wax and grime, the ornate plasterwork repaired by skilled artisans. "It's coming together beautifully," observed Lucas Whitmore, who had taken to visiting the renovation site regularly. At 84, he moved slowly with the aid of a cane, but his mind remained sharp and his enthusiasm for the project infectious. "The acoustics are even better than we hoped," I replied. "The performance series should launch by spring if we maintain the current timeline." The board's vote had been decisive, 11-3 in favor of the hybrid model, with Trey and 2 loyalists forming the only opposition. The proposed structure preserved the club's existence while transforming the building into a primarily public cultural institution. Club members retained private dining rooms, the library, and exclusive access to certain events, but the most magnificent spaces would now be shared with the broader community. "Have you seen today's Times?" Lucas asked, handing me a folded newspaper. Architectural section. I opened to the indicated page, finding a feature article on the Hudson Bay Club transformation. The headline read, "Historic Preservation Meets Modern Purpose, a New Model for Architectural Heritage." "They're calling it visionary," Lucas noted with satisfaction. "A template for reimagining other exclusive spaces throughout the city." "It's still early," I cautioned, though I couldn't help feeling proud. "We have months of work ahead before the public opening." "The hardest part is already accomplished," he countered. "Not the construction, the conceptual breakthrough, proving that tradition and accessibility can coexist." Before I could respond, I spotted Doug entering through the ballroom's massive doorway. Since the board vote, he had been actively involved in the transition, using his financial expertise to structure the new membership model while helping navigate the club's complex social dynamics. "Sorry I'm late," he said, joining us. "Meeting with the membership committee ran long. They're actually embracing the change better than expected. 17 former members have already reapplied under the new structure." "And Trey?" I asked. Doug's expression turned wry. "Resigned his membership in protest. Though I suspect it's less about principle and more about avoiding accountability for the financial mismanagement." "And Elsa?" I ventured cautiously. A shadow crossed his face. "We're negotiating. She's not thrilled with my involvement in the transformation, but we're talking. Actually talking, not just performing the roles we've played for years." The revelation that Whitmore Enterprises owned the building had created more than just a shift in the club's trajectory. It had catalyzed personal reckonings throughout the institution. Doug's marriage was undergoing its own renovation, stripping away facades to determine what foundation remained. "Speaking of negotiations," Lucas interjected, "I've been considering the Brooklyn building in your portfolio. The Art Deco renovation. I'd be interested in discussing potential investment." I glanced at him in surprise. "That project is struggling with remediation costs. It's hardly an obvious investment opportunity." Lucas smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I've never been interested in obvious opportunities, my dear. Only in vision worth supporting. You clearly have that in abundance." 6. Months later, I stood on the rooftop garden of the newly renamed Hudson Bay Cultural Center, watching as the city lights began twinkling in the early evening darkness. The grand opening gala was underway in the ballroom below, a deliberate echo of the event that had catalyzed this transformation half a year earlier, but with one significant difference. The guest list included not just former club members, but community leaders, arts patrons, preservation activists, and neighborhood residents. The building had been reborn. The limestone facade gleamed after meticulous restoration. The grand public spaces had been returned to their original glory while incorporating modern amenities. The private club areas operated with renewed purpose and a more diverse membership. What had once been an emblem of exclusivity now served as a model for how historic spaces could honor their past while embracing a more inclusive future. Hiding from your own triumph? Doug asked, joining me on the rooftop with 2 champagne flutes in hand. I accepted one with a smile, just taking a moment to appreciate it. Hard to believe how much has changed since the last gala here. In the building or between us? He asked, leaning against the stone balustrade beside me. Both. We stood in companionable silence, sipping champagne and looking out at the city skyline. Doug had changed in subtle but significant ways over the past months. His wardrobe remained impeccable but had relaxed slightly. Less rigid conformity to the unwritten rules of his former social circle, more personal expression. He'd let his hair return to its natural waves. Most notably, the constant tension he'd carried for years, the vigilant self-monitoring of someone always performing for acceptance, had eased. Elsa's downstairs, he said eventually. She decided to attend after all. This surprised me. Elsa had been conspicuously absent from all events related to the building's transformation. That's unexpected. We've reached a kind of equilibrium, Doug explained. Not what we had before, but something more authentic in its way. She's admitted she's impressed with the result, even if she still disagrees with the concept. And Trey? Still nursing his wounded pride in Florida. He bought a membership in some exclusive golf club where he can complain about the decline of civilization to a sympathetic audience. Doug's smile held a hint of the mischievous brother I remembered from childhood. Though I heard 3 other former board members have applied for membership in our new model. Progress comes in unexpected forms, I observed. Speaking of progress, Doug continued, I hear the Brooklyn restoration is back on track with Whitmore's investment. I nodded. The remediation is complete. We're starting interior work next month. And Lucas is involved in both projects now? He says he's funding his own legacy, proving that beautiful spaces can be both preserved and democratized. Below us, the sounds of the celebration drifted up. Music, laughter, the ambient hum of a diverse gathering. What once had been a hushed, exclusive enclave now pulsed with vibrant energy. I never thanked you properly, Doug said suddenly. For what? For not giving up on me. For forcing me to confront the contradictions I'd been living with. For reminding me of who I really am beneath all the adaptations. I turned to study my brother's face, familiar yet changed, like the building we stood upon. And who is that? Person! The real Douglas Harrington? His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. Still figuring that out. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not trying to be someone else's version of myself. We clinked, our glasses together in a quiet toast. Below us, a building that had once stood for exclusivity now welcomed a diverse cross-section of the city. Beside me, a brother who had once drifted away in pursuit of acceptance had found his way back to authenticity. Some transformations happen in grand public gestures, like converting a private club into a cultural center. Others unfold more quietly, in conversations on rooftop gardens, in rediscovered connections, in the courage to say, you don't belong here, to the false self we've created. In both cases, the most powerful changes come not from destruction, but from thoughtful reimagining, preserving what matters while opening new possibilities for the future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.